Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary secrets. William Thompson thought he was just another face in the crowd, walking through the museum's marble halls, like any other visitor. He had no idea that within the next hour, a single conversation with a security guard would unravel a mystery his mother had kept buried for 37 years. What started as a casual afternoon would become the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he believed about his family, his past, and himself. The autumn rain drummed steadily against the tall windows of the Metropolitan Museum as William Thompson adjusted his worn leather jacket and checked his watch. 3:15 in the afternoon. He had exactly 45 minutes before his meeting with the insurance adjuster downtown. But something had drawn him here instead. Maybe it was the weight of the envelope in his jacket pocket, the one his mother had pressed into his hands just 3 days before she passed away. Maybe it was the cryptic words she had whispered with her final breath. Find the guard who remembers the painting. William had dismissed it as the rambling of a dying woman, confused by medication and grief. But here he was, standing in the American wing of the Met, staring at empty spaces on walls where paintings once hung. His mother, Margaret Thompson, had worked here as a restoration specialist for over 2 decades before her retirement. She had loved this place with a passion that sometimes made William feel like he was competing with marble statues and oil paintings for her attention. The museum felt different today, quieter than usual, with only a handful of visitors wandering through the galleries. William found himself drawn toward the European painting section, though he couldn't explain why. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as he passed by masterpieces that had witnessed centuries of human drama. Somewhere in this maze of art and history lay the answer to his mother's final words, though he had no idea what he was looking for. He paused in front of a Monet, watching the way the light seemed to dance across the painted water lilies. His mother had always said that great art had the power to transport you to another time and place. Standing here now, William could almost feel her presence beside him, pointing out the subtle brushstrokes and explaining how the artist had captured light itself on canvas. "Excuse me, sir." William turned to find a tall, elderly security guard approaching him. The man had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and moved with the careful dignity of someone who had spent years walking these halls. His uniform was impeccable, and a small name tag read, Harold Chen, 28 years of service. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help noticing you," Harold said, his voice carrying a slight accent that William couldn't immediately place. "You look very familiar. Have we met before?" William shook his head. "I don't think so. This is actually my first time visiting in years." Harold studied William's face more carefully, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to something deeper. "What's your last name, if you don't mind me asking?" "Thompson, William Thompson." The change in Harold's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. His eyes widened slightly, and he took a small step backward as if William had just revealed something shocking. "Thompson," Harold repeated slowly. "And your mother was she Margaret Thompson?" "Yes, she was. She passed away 3 days ago." "How did you know her?" Harold glanced around the gallery nervously, making sure no other visitors were within earshot. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to talk. But not here. Too many ears, too many eyes. Do you have a few minutes?" "I suppose so," William said, though his meeting downtown suddenly seemed far less important than whatever Harold was about to tell him. "Follow me," Harold said, leading William through a series of galleries toward a section of the museum William had never seen before. They walked in silence, passing through doors marked staff only, and down a corridor lined with storage rooms and administrative offices. Harold's office was small and cluttered, with decades' worth of incident reports, visitor logs, and security protocols filing every available surface. The walls were covered with photographs, some official museum documentation, others clearly personal snapshots of Harold with various museum staff over the years. William recognized his mother in several of the photos, looking younger and happier than he remembered her being in recent years. "Please, sit down," Harold said, gesturing to a worn armchair across from his desk. He closed the door carefully and turned the lock, a gesture that made William's anxiety spike. Your mother, Harold began, settling into his own chair, was a remarkable woman. Brilliant, dedicated, and one of the most talented restoration specialists this museum has ever employed. But there's something about her work here that very few people knew about. Something she made me promise never to discuss with anyone. William leaned forward. What kind of something? Harold opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. About 15 years ago, your mother came to me with a problem. She had discovered something during a routine restoration project that troubled her deeply. Something that could have destroyed careers, ruined reputations, and potentially implicated some very powerful people. I'm not following, William said, though his heart was beginning to race. Your mother was working on a painting that had been donated to the museum by a wealthy collector. On the surface, it appeared to be a legitimate 19th century landscape by a relatively unknown American artist. But during the restoration process, she discovered something hidden beneath the original paint. Harold opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs. They showed what appeared to be X-ray images of a painting, revealing layers of paint and canvas beneath the visible surface. What am I looking at? William asked. Evidence of forgery, Harold said simply. But not just any forgery. Your mother discovered that this particular painting was covering up something much more valuable, a lost work by Thomas Cole, one of the founders of the Hudson River School. The painting was worth potentially millions of dollars. William stared at the photographs, trying to process what Harold was telling him. So someone had painted over a valuable artwork to hide it? That's what your mother thought initially, Harold said. But as she dug deeper, she realized the situation was far more complex. The collector who had donated the painting was a prominent businessman with connections to several major museums. If word got out that he had unknowingly donated a forgery, or worse, that he had been involved in some kind of art fraud scheme, it would have been a scandal of massive proportions. What did my mother do? Harold's expression grew grave. She came to me because she trusted me, and because she knew I had seen things in this museum that weren't always by the book. She was torn between her professional obligation to report the discovery and her fear of what might happen if she did. William felt a growing sense of unease. His mother had always seemed so straightforward, so committed to doing the right thing. The idea that she might have been involved in covering up something like this seemed impossible. She spent weeks wrestling with the decision, Harold continued. But ultimately, she decided that exposing the truth might do more harm than good. Too many innocent people could be hurt. Museum staff who had authenticated the piece, other collectors who might be implicated, even the donor's family members who likely had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. So she kept quiet? She did more than that, Harold said, pulling out another set of photographs. She carefully removed the forged layer of paint and restored the original Cole painting beneath. But instead of reporting her discovery, she created detailed documentation of everything she had found and sealed it away. Harold handed William a key, old and brass, with an intricate pattern etched into its surface. Your mother gave me this key 3 months ago when she first got her diagnosis. She said that if anything happened to her, I should give it to you along with specific instructions. Instructions for what? There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 847. Inside that box is everything your mother documented about the Cole painting, plus something else. Something she said you would need to understand the full scope of what she had discovered. William turned the key over in his hands, feeling its weight. What kind of something else? Harold hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. Your mother believed that the forged painting wasn't an isolated incident. She suspected there might be other pieces in the museum's collection that had similar issues, works that weren't what they appeared to be on the surface. Forgeries? Stolen pieces? Works with questionable provenance? Your mother had developed what she called her intuition over the years. She could spot inconsistencies that others missed, subtle signs that a piece might not be authentic or legitimate. William felt overwhelmed. The woman he had known as his meticulous, rule-following mother had apparently been sitting on information that could shake the art world. Why didn't she ever tell me any of this? Because she was protecting you, Harold said simply. And because she wasn't sure what to do with the information she had gathered, She spent years trying to decide whether she had made the right choice in keeping quiet about the coal painting. Harold stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of his office. He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to William. "She wrote this letter for you 6 months ago. She said you should read it before you decide whether to open that safety deposit box." William took the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written across the front in his mother's familiar handwriting, along with the words, "To be opened only after my death." "I'll leave you alone to read it," Harold said, moving toward the door. "Take as much time as you need. When you're ready, I'll tell you the rest of what your mother wanted you to know." 6 habits kept. As Harold stepped out of the office and closed the door behind him, William found himself alone with his mother's final words. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted with secrets and revelations that would change everything he thought he knew about the woman who had raised him. Outside, the rain continued to fall against the windows, and somewhere in the galleries beyond, visitors moved quietly among masterpieces that might not be what they seemed. William's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope and began to read his mother's confession. The letter began simply, "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and it is time for you to learn the truth about why I never remarried after your father died, why I devoted my life so completely to this museum, and why the decisions I made here will now become your burden to bear." As William read on, he realized that his quiet afternoon at the museum was about to become something much more significant. The guard's warning had been just the beginning. What his mother had discovered, and what she had done about it, was about to thrust William into a world of art authentication, institutional cover-ups, and moral dilemmas that would challenge everything he believed about truth, justice, and family loyalty. The rain outside seemed to beat more insistently against the windows as William continued reading, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. William's hands trembled as he finished reading his mother's letter. The words seemed to blur together on the page, each revelation more shocking than the last. Margaret Thompson had not just discovered one questionable painting, she had uncovered what appeared to be a systematic pattern of authentication problems spanning multiple decades at the Metropolitan Museum. The letter revealed that his mother had spent the final 15 years of her career secretly documenting suspicious pieces, creating a comprehensive database of works that didn't match their official attributions. She had discovered paintings with altered signatures, sculptures with forged provenance documents, and artifacts that appeared to have been acquired through questionable channels. But the most devastating revelation came in the letter's final paragraphs. His mother wrote about pressure from museum administrators, subtle threats to her career, and her growing realization that some of the institution's most prominent donors and board members might be aware of the problems, but chose to look the other way. "I became a guardian of secrets I never wanted to keep," she had written, "but I also became a protector of truth that the world might not be ready to hear." A soft knock on Harold's office door interrupted William's thoughts. The security guard entered quietly, his expression showing that he understood the weight of what William had just learned. "How much of this did you know?" William asked, holding up the letter. Harold sat down heavily in his chair. "More than I wanted to, less than your mother discovered. She trusted me because I had seen things over the years. Small inconsistencies, paperwork that didn't quite add up, conversations between administrators that stopped abruptly when I walked by."
"The safety deposit box," William said.
"What exactly is in there?" "Documentation that could potentially implicate dozens of people, including some of the most respected names in the art world. Your mother spent years gathering evidence, but she could never decide what to do with it." Harold pulled out a worn notebook from his desk drawer. "She asked me to keep track of certain visitors, people who came to see specific pieces, researchers who asked particular questions, dealers who seemed unusually interested in the museum's acquisition records." William flipped through the notebook, seeing pages of names, dates, and detailed observations written in Harold's careful handwriting. Some names he recognized from newspaper society pages, wealthy collectors, prominent gallery owners, even a few celebrities known for their art collections. "This is like a surveillance log," William said. "Your mother called it connecting the dots," Harold replied. She believed that if you mapped out the relationships between certain donors, certain acquisitions, and certain authentication decisions, you would start to see patterns that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. William felt a growing sense of dread. Are you saying that people were working together to manipulate the museum's collection? I'm saying that your mother suspected there might be a network of people who were using the museum's reputation to legitimize questionable artworks. Once a piece is accepted into the Met's collection, its authenticity becomes much harder to challenge. Harold stood and walked to a locked filing cabinet. He produced another key and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a large portfolio case. Your mother left this for you as well. She said it would help you understand the scope of what she discovered, but she also said it might be the most dangerous thing you'll ever possess. William accepted the portfolio with reluctance. It was heavier than he expected, bound with leather straps and secured with a small padlock. What's the most dangerous piece of information in here? William asked. Harold's expression grew grim. Your mother discovered that one of the museum's most celebrated acquisitions from the 90s, a painting that's been featured in countless publications and exhibitions, was stolen from a Jewish family during World War II. The current ownership documents appear to have been fabricated to hide its true history. William felt the blood drain from his face. Art stolen by Nazis was one of the most sensitive and legally complex issues in the museum world. Families had been fighting for decades to recover stolen works, and museums were increasingly being forced to return pieces with questionable wartime provenance. Who knows about this? The acquisition was approved by the museum's board, authenticated by respected experts, and celebrated in the press. Either everyone involved was fooled by very sophisticated forgeries, or some people knew exactly what they were doing. Harold returned to his desk and pulled out a manila envelope, marked with today's date. There's something else. This morning, I received a call from someone claiming to be a journalist working on a story about art authentication at major museums. They specifically asked about your mother's work and whether the museum had ever discovered any problems with pieces in its collection. William's anxiety spiked. What did you tell them? I said I was just a security guard and suggested they contact the museum's public relations department, but the timing seems suspicious. Your mother dies 3 days ago, and suddenly someone is asking questions about her work. You think someone knows what she discovered? I think your mother may have been more careful about keeping secrets than she was about keeping secret that she had secrets, Harold said. Over the years, certain people may have noticed her spending extra time with specific pieces, asking unusual questions, or accessing records that weren't directly related to her restoration work. William opened the portfolio case and found himself looking at hundreds of photographs, documents, and handwritten notes organized in meticulous detail. His mother had created what amounted to a shadow catalog of the museum's collection, with detailed analysis of pieces that didn't match their official descriptions. The first section contained photographs of X-ray analyses, chemical tests, and microscopic examinations that revealed hidden details about various artworks. William saw evidence of overpainted signatures, artificially aged canvases, and pigments that hadn't been invented until decades after a piece's supposed creation date. The second section was filled with documents, acquisition records, provenance reports, insurance appraisals, and correspondence between museum officials, donors, and authentication experts. Many of the documents had been photocopied from museum files, suggesting that his mother had been secretly accessing administrative records. But it was the third section that made William's heart race. Here were photographs of people, museum visitors, staff members, and what appeared to be surveillance shots taken in galleries and storage areas. His mother had been documenting not just questionable artworks, but the people who were interested in those specific pieces. She was investigating people, William said, looking up at Harold. She was trying to understand how questionable pieces ended up in the museum's collection. That meant tracking the donors, the dealers, the authentication experts, and anyone else who had been involved in the acquisition process. Harold pointed to a photograph showing two men in expensive suits examining a particular painting. Your mother took that picture 18 months ago. The man on the left is Marcus Rothwell, one of the museum's major donors. The man on the right is Dr. Eric Volkov, one of Europe's most respected authentication experts. What's significant about them looking at a painting? That particular painting is one of the pieces your mother believed was stolen during World War II. According to the museum's records, Rothwell donated it in 1994, and Volkov provided the authentication that confirmed its legitimacy. Your mother discovered evidence that suggests both men knew about the painting's real history. William studied the photograph more carefully. Both men were pointing at specific details on the painting, their expressions serious and focused. What kind of evidence? Harold pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be copies of German wartime documents. Your mother spent 2 years working with a researcher in Berlin who specializes in tracking stolen art. They found records showing that this painting was confiscated from the Goldberg family in 1943. The family has been searching for it ever since. And Rothwell and Volkov knew this? Your mother found a letter in the museum's files, a letter that wasn't supposed to be there. It was correspondence between Rothwell and a dealer in Switzerland, discussing the painting's complicated history and the need to clean up the documentation before donating it to the museum. William felt sick. The implications were staggering. If his mother's suspicions were correct, then some of the art world's most respected figures had been involved in laundering stolen artworks through the museum's collection. Why didn't she go to the authorities? Harold sighed heavily, because she wasn't sure who she could trust. The network of relationships in the art world is small and interconnected. Authentication experts work for multiple museums, donors serve on various boards, and dealers maintain relationships with institutions around the world. Your mother worried that exposing one part of the network might simply cause the other parts to adapt and cover their tracks more effectively. So she just collected evidence and did nothing with it? She was waiting for the right moment, or maybe the right person to help her decide what to do. I think she hoped that person might be you. William closed the portfolio case, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility his mother had left him. The rain outside had intensified, and the sound of water against the windows seemed to echo the storm brewing in his mind. "There's one more thing," Harold said quietly. "Your mother wasn't the only person who suspected there were problems with the museum's collection. About 6 months ago, she mentioned that she had been contacted by someone else, another museum professional who had noticed similar patterns at different institutions." "Who?" "She never told me the person's name, but she said they had been gathering evidence from multiple museums and trying to map out what they called the authentication network. Your mother thought they might be preparing to go public with their findings." William felt a chill of fear. "Where is this person now?" Harold's expression grew troubled. "I don't know. Your mother stopped mentioning them about 3 months ago. When I asked, she said the person had decided to stop their investigation. Stop by choice, or stop by someone else? That's what your mother was afraid to find out." The office fell silent except for the sound of rain and the distant murmur of museum visitors in the galleries beyond. William realized that his mother's warning about finding the guard who remembers the painting had been just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. Looking at Harold, William asked the question that had been forming in his mind since he started reading his mother's letter. "What do you think I should do?" Harold removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture that seemed to buy him time to consider his answer. "Your mother spent 15 years trying to answer that same question," he finally said. "She never found an answer she was comfortable with. But she did leave you one piece of guidance." Harold pulled out a small sealed envelope, no bigger than a business card. "She said to give this to you only if you decided you wanted to open the safety deposit box." William took the envelope and opened it to find a single sentence written in his mother's handwriting. "The truth is worth the risk, but make sure you're ready for the consequences." As William sat in Harold's office, surrounded by evidence of institutional corruption and art world conspiracies, he realized that his mother's warning had been both a gift and a burden. She had given him the tools to expose a truth that could shake the foundations of the art world. But she had also given him the responsibility of deciding whether that truth should be revealed. The rain continued to fall outside, and somewhere in the galleries beyond, visitors admired masterpieces that might not be what they seemed. William's decision would determine whether those illusions would be preserved or shattered. 2 days after his meeting with Harold, William stood outside First National Bank with the brass key clutched in his sweaty palm. He had spent the previous 48 hours reading and rereading his mother's documentation, trying to understand the full scope of what she had discovered. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of stolen paintings, forged documents, and the faces of people who might be willing to kill to protect their secrets. The bank's marble lobby felt cold and imposing as William approached the safety deposit box area. The attendant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led him through the security procedures with professional efficiency. She seemed unaware that the key in William's hand might unlock evidence that could destroy careers and potentially send people to prison. Box 847 was larger than William had expected, more like a small file cabinet than the typical narrow boxes he had seen in movies. As the attendant left him alone in the private viewing room, William hesitated before turning the key. Once he opened this box, there would be no going back. He would either become a guardian of his mother's secrets or the person who brought those secrets into the light. The box opened with a soft click, revealing neat stacks of documents, photographs, and several items William hadn't expected to find. On top was another letter from his mother, this one much shorter than the first. William, if you have come this far, then you have decided that the truth matters more than comfort. What you will find in this box is 15 years of careful documentation, but it is also 15 years of fear, doubt, and sleepless nights. I have given you a burden I could never bear to carry alone. Use it wisely. Beneath the letter was a thick folder labeled The Goldberg Collection, Stolen 1943. William opened it to find dozens of documents in German, English, and French, along with photographs of paintings, sculptures, and decorative objects that had belonged to the Goldberg family before the war. Each item was meticulously documented with pre-war ownership records, wartime confiscation documents, and post-war recovery attempts. But what made William's blood run cold was the second set of documents in the folder. Acquisition records from the Metropolitan Museum, showing that at least 12 pieces from the Goldberg collection were currently in the museum's permanent collection. Each piece had been donated by different wealthy collectors over the past 3 decades, and each donation had been carefully spaced out to avoid detection. The evidence suggested a systematic effort to launder stolen Nazi art through the museum's collection. Someone had been breaking up the Goldberg collection and distributing pieces to different collectors, who then donated them to the museum at strategic intervals. The donors received tax benefits and social recognition, while the stolen artworks gained legitimate provenance through the museum's respected authentication process. William found a detailed analysis in his mother's handwriting that mapped out the relationships between the various donors. Many of them served on the same boards, belonged to the same clubs, or had business relationships that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. At the center of the network was Marcus Rothwell, the museum donor Harold had mentioned, who appeared to have connections to nearly every suspicious acquisition. The second major folder contained evidence of a different type of fraud. His mother had documented what appeared to be a scheme involving the creation of fake masterpieces that were then discovered and sold to the museum at enormous prices. The scheme worked by taking lesser-known works by famous artists and artificially aging them to appear much older and more significant than they actually were. The documentation showed how certain dealers would discover these enhanced works, have them authenticated by carefully chosen experts, and then sell them to wealthy collectors, who would eventually donate them to museums. The process transformed relatively worthless paintings into multi-million-dollar acquisitions, generating enormous profits for everyone involved except the museums and the public who ultimately owned the collections. But it was the third folder that contained the most shocking revelations, labeled Current Operations. It contained evidence that the schemes his mother had discovered were not historical artifacts but ongoing criminal enterprises. The most recent documents were dated just 6 months before his mother's death, suggesting that she had continued investigating until her illness made it impossible. This folder contained correspondence between museum administrators and outside parties that suggested active participation in authentication fraud. William read emails discussing problem pieces that needed special handling, and budget allocations for enhanced provenance research that appeared to be payments for fabricated documentation. One email chain particularly stood out. It was correspondence between the museum's chief curator, Dr. Wokash, Patricia Wells, and an outside consultant named David Morrison. They were discussing a recently donated Renaissance sculpture that had documentation issues that needed to be resolved discreetly. The emails made it clear that both parties knew the sculpture's provenance was questionable, but they were working together to create a paper trail that would make it appear legitimate. Morrison was being paid $50,000 to research the sculpture's history, which actually meant creating fake documentation to support its authenticity. William realized that his mother had not just discovered past crimes, she had uncovered evidence of crimes that were still being committed. The people involved were not just art world figures from decades past, but individuals who were currently working at the museum and in positions of power throughout the art community. At the bottom of the box, William found something that made his heart race: a small recording device, along with dozens of audio recordings on digital files. His mother had been secretly recording conversations with museum staff, donors, and authentication experts. The recordings provided direct evidence of people discussing fraudulent activities, cover-ups, and the need to silence anyone who might threaten their operations. William listened to several recordings on the device, his hands shaking as he heard respected art world figures casually discussing criminal activities. In one recording, Dr. Jean Tilley Wells could be heard telling someone that the Thompson problem needed to be handled carefully because his mother knew too much and was starting to ask the wrong questions. Another recording captured a conversation between Marcus Rothwell and an unidentified man discussing the need to discourage his mother from continuing her research. They talked about subtle pressure tactics, professional isolation, and, if necessary, more direct intervention. The final recording was the most chilling. It was a conversation his mother had recorded just 2 months before her death, in which someone, the voice was disguised but sounded male, called her at home and warned her to stop digging or face the consequences. The caller specifically mentioned William by name, suggesting that the threats extended to her family. William sat in the bank's viewing room, surrounded by evidence that his mother had not just died of cancer. She had died while being actively threatened by people who wanted to protect their criminal enterprise. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. He now possessed evidence that could bring down some of the art world's most powerful figures, but he also understood why his mother had hesitated to act on it. The people involved were wealthy, connected, and had already demonstrated they were willing to threaten anyone who posed a risk to their operations. Going public with this information would make William a target, but keeping it secret would mean allowing the crimes to continue and potentially letting his mother's death go unpunished. As William carefully repacked the contents of the safety deposit box, he noticed one final item he had initially overlooked: a business card for someone named Sarah Chen, identified as an art recovery specialist with an address in Washington, D.C. On the back of the card, his mother had written, "She knows the truth. She can help you decide what to do." William pocketed the business card and left the bank with a clear sense of his next step. His mother had not left him to face this burden alone. She had given him a potential ally, someone who might understand the complexities of art fraud and the dangers of exposing powerful criminals. But as William walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He found himself checking reflections in store windows and taking sudden turns to see if anyone was following him. The paranoia his mother must have felt during her final months was beginning to infect his own thoughts. That evening, William sat in his apartment with his mother's evidence spread across his dining room table. The documentation painted a picture of systemic corruption that went far beyond simple art fraud. The people involved had created a network that manipulated museum collections, defrauded insurance companies, cheated Holocaust survivors out of their stolen artworks, and threatened anyone who tried to expose their crimes. But William also understood that possessing this evidence put him in extreme danger. The people involved had already demonstrated their willingness to threaten his mother, and they would certainly view him as an even greater threat now that he had access to her complete documentation. As he stared at Sarah Chen's business card, William realized that his next decision would determine not just his own future, but potentially the future of art authentication and museum ethics around the world. His mother had spent 15 years gathering evidence of crimes that affected countless victims: Holocaust survivors seeking their stolen art, museums unknowingly displaying forgeries, and the public who trusted cultural institutions to preserve authentic cultural heritage. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. William looked at the caller ID and saw only unknown number. His heart began to race as he remembered the threatening call his mother had recorded. After several rings, he decided to answer. "William Thompson?" The voice was calm, professional, and unfamiliar. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I believe you have something that belonged to your mother. We need to meet." William felt a mix of relief and renewed anxiety. "How did you know I would contact you?" "Because your mother told me you would. She said that if anything happened to her, you would eventually find my card and realize that you needed help deciding what to do with her research." "Can we meet somewhere public?" William asked. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the coffee shop on the corner of 42nd and Broadway. Come alone and bring everything your mother left you. It's time to finish what she started." As William hung up the phone, he realized that his journey from the museum's galleries to this moment had been orchestrated by his mother from beyond the grave. She had left him a trail of breadcrumbs that led not just to evidence of crimes, but to someone who might be able to help him bring the criminals to justice. But William also understood that tomorrow's meeting would mark the point of no return. Once he shared his mother's evidence with Sarah Chen, he would be committed to a course of action that would either expose one of the art world's biggest scandals or potentially cost him his life. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in that vast urban landscape were the people who had threatened his mother, and who would certainly threaten him if they knew what he had discovered. But William also knew that somewhere in those same city lights were the victims of the crimes his mother had documented. Holocaust survivors still searching for their stolen art, museum visitors who deserved to see authentic cultural treasures, and future generations who would inherit either a legacy of truth or a legacy of carefully maintained lies. As William prepared for what might be the most important meeting of his life, he understood that his mother's final warning had been more than just information about hidden crimes. It had been a call to action, a challenge to choose between comfort and justice, between safety and truth. The guard had pulled William aside, and now there was no turning back.